My name's Jason McLeod, and where I'm standing is where a 6-year-old girl spotted a very negative earthbound human spirit as she and her mother were passing by the cemetery on a very stormy afternoon in 1993, just days before Halloween. Kelly watched spellbound as this black spectral form, very spindly in appearance, in the shape of a man, walked straight through this gravestone as if the stone wasn't there before her eyes, and continued to walk through the stones right up into the wrought iron fence. And as the car was passing by, he walked right through the fence, stepped onto the pavement, turned his head and looked at her and pointed. Kelly, staring spellbound in the back seat of the car, looking out the rear window, unsure what to make of this situation. This case became known as Dark Siege, a Connecticut family's nightmare. I recreated the case in a cinematic horror format that's impossible to put down, with the sole purpose of warning kids, preteens especially, and everyone against using Ouija boards. Because upon returning home, no one believed Kelly that she saw this spirit until the spirit began to make its presence known. When the 16-year-old brother Tyler and his 2 best friends got off the school bus 2 days later, they spotted this same form walking the outside perimeter of the house, and then was inside the house, scaring them out of their minds. And then they realized, oh my God, Kelly was telling the truth. But why is this specter after the 6-year-old? So they ran to the mall and bought a Ouija board in hopes to make contact and get answers, and there they committed the worst mistake. They opened the floodgates. This became the most rapid escalation from inhuman diabolical infestation, leading to oppression of the family, leading to possession, requiring exorcism that we've ever experienced. I began my career as an investigator working under the late legendary Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren, and my sole purpose in bringing this forward is to warn kids and warn everyone, please stay away from Ouija boards. So here we have the route that Linda and Kelly were taking to go back home. They were completely traumatized from the afternoon. It's still stormy, it's raining and thundering and booming, and Kelly is completely shaken up about what she had seen. She doesn't know how to make sense of what she had seen. You know, she never even knew that spirits existed, and here she had one just tapping into her consciousness the way that it did. And you know, Mom's all rattled. And what's interesting is we're going to be turning here. We're going to be passing the Our Lady of the Rosary Chapel, which is where the exorcism was to take place. Little did they know that would be happening less than a month and a half later. And here this is on the left. This is also the cemetery where Ed and Lorraine Warren are buried, but it's just an interesting synchronicity that they passed this, never even realizing that they would soon be back there. And again, it's booming and thundering and raining and leaves are flying all over the place. Very strange, storm. And what's interesting as well is that it's the electromagnetism in the air and the ozone that allowed this spirit to manifest the way that it did in order for Kelly to perceive it. And here we're actually going to be passing Knollwood Drive, which is where Ed and Lorraine Warren lived. God rest their souls. But it's interesting, all of these things are within such close proximity of each other. So at this point, Kelly is really trying to put everything out of her mind. She held on tightly to her one-eared stuffed bunny because it takes a while to overcome the type of trauma she had just experienced. They're just so desperate to get home at this point. They'd both had enough of the trauma that took place. They were very much looking forward to being back in the safety of their own home. Little did they know that within just a few days, their home would become a place that they would dread returning to because of the awful things that were taking place there. This is called oppression, when these demonic spirits were engaged in a campaign to isolate and terrorize them, to siphon the energy out of them. I call it the fear buffet. Whenever the Warrens got personally involved in a case, the activity that the families had been reporting and describing would tend to cease. This is because these spirits were intentionally trying to hide from the Warrens or their investigators, such as myself, so no one would witness what they needed to witness in order to get the church involved. So that's when Ed would initiate what was called religious provocation, which is a very dangerous situation for everyone involved. Ed put himself at great risk every time he tried to provoke these spirits through religious means by brandishing crucifixes or casting holy water or by reciting prayer or commanding the spirits to appear in the name of Jesus Christ. It was always the name and the power of God and in Jesus Christ, never in the name of Ed Warren. That would invite diabolical attacks upon him, and he was very careful not to do so or not to slip up. The last thing that demonic spirits want is for the name of Jesus Christ to be mentioned, or God, or the archangels to be invoked. The mentioning of these names is enough to cause these spirits to go berserk, so that activity can be witnessed by those that are trying to witness it. And based upon the activity that takes place, we can gauge what type of entity we're dealing with. This is Edith Wheeler Memorial Library in Monroe, where the family friend Julie went and found a flyer for a psychic fair taking place, and that's how Julie ended up becoming pivotal in trying to find help. And here we're approaching the road where they lived. They were excited to be nearing home, and were hoping that no further activity would take place that would traumatize them, aside from the continuous barrage of the bad weather. And little Kelly saw that they had turned onto their road. She felt a great sense of comfort and relief that they were somehow off limits to these spirits. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth, because the spirit was following them, and it was not making itself known like it had earlier. The only time Kelly actually saw the spirit was at the cemetery, and as they were driving home, she did not feel its presence as she had earlier. But because she had made the connection, it was intent on following her home. At that time, they were dealing with a very negative earthbound human spirit. He was a man who had been miserable in life, and he really had no one to love him, and that's a very lonely situation. Only his older sister, it turns out, came to his funeral. No one else. No friends. No one. He was an extremely lonely and miserable personality. When he saw that bright, vibrant little girl was able to perceive him, he jumped at the opportunity to make his presence known, to tap into her consciousness, and to try and tell his tale. Everything that he did was, of course, perceived as being very scary and dark. He was an imposter in the home, and therefore was viewed as a great threat. It turns out that once Kelly's 16-year-old brother Tyler and his two best friends used the Ouija board, they opened the floodgates, and the spirits that came through were the threat. They were 8 powerful intelligences, diabolical spirits that had never walked the earth in human form. That's how Ed Warren would describe them. They had incredible resolve to completely destroy the family. The interesting thing is, these spirits hate everyone, every human being, because we're made in the image and the likeness of God. Humanity is favored and loved by God, and when these demonic spirits can harm someone, harm humans, they get great satisfaction out of it because they actually believe that they're being successful at hurting God. So they didn't want to admit that they went onto this property to use this tunnel, to use the board far away from the house so it wouldn't affect the house, because it might be, private land or so forth. So they said, just don't release that information. So again, their real identities aren't known, but they, being teens, they didn't want to get any more trouble than they did. So Jimmy lived within a bicycle ride of Tyler, which was handy, so they could make it to each other's homes without having to use cars, because they were 16, they didn't really have access to cars unless they had that opportunity. So yeah, this is all fenced in. This location was right near Jimmy's house, and they did not want to use the Ouija board again in any of their houses, of course, because they realized they could cause the same phenomena to happen there or make it worse in the McLaughlin home. So they wanted to figure out where in the world they could use the board to try to get answers. And originally, when they gave them permission to recreate this case, they didn't want it to be known that they used this location, because they were, afraid they'd get into trouble, because this is, some kind, maybe a protected area or so forth. But they thought they could use it inside this tunnel. At the time, apparently, there was very little water going through, but they decided to use this far away from their homes. And it was an absolutely, spooky, terrifying location, because within the tunnel, the echoes that were taking place through their voices and their shrieks and screams and panic, because of the activity that was actually, or the messages that were coming through on the Ouija board, was really something to really add to their already shaken nerves. But this was an absolute double mistake for them to use the Ouija board a second time. And it kept disappearing and reappearing in their homes, in their school lockers, in the garbage can. You couldn't get rid of it. And this is a common phenomenon with these Ouija boards. They're not to be toyed with, and that's my main message here, is do not play with these Ouija boards, because you're opening a doorway to ruin in many cases, and they'll come through and affect you on their time. When you're 20 years later, perhaps, when you're sick and you're tired and you're anxious or you're depressed or you're suicidal and so forth, then they'll come and wreak havoc in your lives. In this case, however, which made this Dark Siege case so phenomenal, is that they came right in the very same evening. And these spirits were not messing around. They wanted these boys, and they wanted them bad. And it's just a terrifying experience for everybody, and I don't wish it on anyone. Please don't use Ouija boards. Late October in Connecticut is a magical time of year. You have the beautiful falling leaves, the crisp air, the cardboard skeletons, the candy corn, the jack-o'-lanterns. It's a magical time of year, especially for children, as you have Halloween approaching, which is, of course, a very mysterious holiday. And on the day in question, when 6-year-old Kelly and her mother were driving by Union Cemetery in the fall of 1993, just days before Halloween, we had an electrical storm that came out of nowhere, thunder and lightning and ozone being generated. So all of these things were making everything right for a haunting to take place. And you have a very sensitive little girl passing by the cemetery after the mother plants the suggestion in her mind, be very watchful, Kelly, maybe we'll see a ghost. That's scary, but then she's looking for it. So that's, all of these things lend toward haunting phenomena. And I just wanted to basically bring you here to this incredible place to show you the beauty of the area and also the scene in which this entire case was unfolding in. So here we are at the Trumbull Mall in Trumbull, Connecticut, and this is where Jimmy, Tyler, and Kyle came to in an effort to acquire a Ouija board so that they can initiate communication with the spirit that was now obviously infesting their house. And this was the absolute worst decision they could have made. And as they were in the store at KB Toy and Hobby, examining the Ouija board, they actually experienced an otherworldly encounter, which we assume to be one of their spirit guides or guardians, and who told them, boys, do yourselves a favor and put that board back on the shelf where you found it. And they didn't heed the warning, and they proceeded to buy it. And it was the worst possible decision they could have made, because in using that board inside the house to initiate contact with the spirit, they opened the floodgates. Being 16-year-olds, they issued all the wrong challenges to the earthbound human spirit that was in the house, but there were other spirits listening, and in through that doorway that they opened through their God-given free will, 8 different intelligences came through. So after that encounter with the older woman in the store who warned them against buying the board, who left after they ignored the warning, Tyler ran out after to try to find her, to ask more questions. He was curious, of course, and she was nowhere to be found. Little old lady in a pink shawl, white curly hair, gold rimmed glasses, and he was literally looking everywhere. He ran up to the glass barrier to look down to see where she could have gone. She wasn't on the escalator. He ran around the corner. Nowhere to be found. There's no way that this little old lady was going to, outpace him, outrun him. So when Tyler rounded the corner, intent on telling his friends they're not going to buy that board, he found that the metal grate was closed and the lights were off, and Jimmy and Kyle were standing there with smiles on their faces, and he realized it was too late. And if he had stuck to his guns and told them we're not buying it, actually he did tell them we're going to throw it out, and they said no way. They bought it, they were intent on using it. And if they hadn't used it, then the family would have been spared the entire nightmare that took place afterwards. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And again, my main warning in bringing this case to public awareness, the only reason the family decided to come forward after all this time is to warn kids against using Ouija boards, because that's the catalyst behind 95% of all the cases of diabolical infestation, oppression, and possession. That's a direct quote from my friend and mentor, Ed Warren. And it's a serious warning, and people need to heed it. This is sold as a game right here in a toy store. Sold as a child's game, communicate with spirits. It's a parlor game, no problem. $14.99, a small price to pay for ruining your life. And it's the most dangerous piece of negative occult paraphernalia in existence. The theme is the concept of using your God-given free will to initiate dialogue with an entity that you can't see, have no idea where it is, what its intentions are, whether it's lying to you, or what its power levels are. And you claim that nothing happened after you used it, but we can only see 1% of the matter, space, and energy around us in these human bodies. So to say that nothing happened is inaccurate. And they don't come on our time. They come on their time. when you're sick, when you're down, when you're depressed, when your life is a mess. That's when you're vulnerable, and that's when they come and destroy you. But in this case, these guys were all just very interested in trying to find out why the 6-year-old girl attracted a spirit from Union Cemetery, and they wanted answers. And this is the only way they knew how. It was the worst mistake they could have made. So this is Bill's Drive-In. It's a staple here in Monroe, Connecticut. It's where a lot of the teenagers would hang out. And it was really just an escape from the nightmare that these 3 teenage boys were experiencing, somehow to try to get back into some kind of normalcy where they would hang out and have a burger and have some fries and so forth. And this is just a respite for them. So here we are at the Merritt Canteen. This is a staple here in Connecticut. Burgers, fries, rings, it's been around forever. And this is where the teenage boys came the night of Mischief Night. And they came here to get some food, burgers and fries. It's it's something that's really popular still to this day. And one of the guys found a flyer for a haunted house, a make-believe haunted house. And he came back to the table and he said, "Shh, get a load of this." And he's like, "Yeah, right. Talk about a joke compared to what's going on with us." And one of them says, "We could sell tickets," right? Anyway, but it was a place for them to come and relax and try again to just escape the craziness that was going on inside that house. And they went just across the street here to Price Right to get eggs and toilet paper and soap for their campaign of wanton destruction later in that evening, where they went and egged one of the poor old men at the Hidden Knolls retirement area. But kids, So this is where the teens came to on Mischief Night to egg the old folks area, and they pulled over right here, and they went through this brush. This is probably less dense at the time, back in '93, and they made their way through the brush, and they had, of course, each had a dozen eggs, and they came in behind these trees, which I can't remember where they said they went, but they just basically, I think it was, they just started throwing eggs at the windows here, and because they just wanted to get old people. And a guy came out, and they just pelted him with eggs, and he said, "You rotten kids, you're gonna burn in hell." And they thought it was a big hoot, and then they ran back to the car and they took off before the cops came. So it just it lends some reality to the whole ordeal, where they just tried to engage in their normal lives, even though their lives were being turned upside down. And what's interesting is actually when they returned from their little mischief night, they went back to the house, and that's where they saw kids jumping the stone wall, going to egg Tyler's house. And that's where the kids, if you've read the books, you'll remember where they seem to be like batting like flies or bees away from them. They were being overcome by something, and then literally the bag that they held, one of them held in the hand, was like batted out of his hand, and they fell on the ground, and then they ran away, and they were actually being attacked by these inhuman spirits that were at the house. For whatever reason, they didn't like it very much that they were about to cause some problems for the original occupants. So here we are at another Connecticut staple called the Blue Colony Diner in Newtown, and this is where Julie, Linda, and Kelly went, I believe on their way to the Danbury Mall to stop here and get some lunch. And while Julie and Linda were talking about the phenomena going on inside the house, Kelly giggled and said, "Look, he's backwards." And she was peeling silly putty off of the face of a man who was in the newspaper print. And it was my face that she was peeling off. And Linda looked down, she said, "Let me see that." And it was about my seminar I was putting on And that's what finally allowed Linda to feel like she actually found somebody that could help her. And it was just a great feeling for her. And finally, there's some hope. And this is this really interesting diner called the Blue Colony Diner. This location, the Edith Wheeler Memorial Library, is pivotal in this Dark Siege case because this is the first place where help was found. The family friend Julie came here in search of answers, in search of books. Instead, she found a flyer advertising a psychic fair in which enabled her to get a hold of the psychic, Yvonne Saxon, who was so pivotal in resolving this case and so instrumental in helping the family in the second ordeal, which I call Dark Siege 2, The Nightmare Returns. It was at this location in 1993 that the exorcism of Matthew McLaughlin took place, and right next to the cemetery, which ironically is now host to the bodies of my friends and mentors, the late legendary Ed and Lorraine Warren. And it's just a remarkable synchronicity, as is everything involved with my experience working with the Warrens. It was a synchronicity from the very beginning about how I met them, all the way until this moment right now, as we've been talking about. And here we have the statue of Archangel Michael, Saint Michael, defeating Satan. And it's very appropriate because this is the place where these demonic spirits were expelled from Matthew, and where the case that became known as Dark Siege, a Connecticut Family's Nightmare, came to a close, or so we thought. There's a darker side to Halloween that most people are oblivious of. It's not all tricks and treats. It's not all candy and games. This is a very dark time of year, and it's a time of year where dark spirits are more active. This is the place where my case that became known as Dark Siege, a Connecticut Family's Nightmare, was concluded until they decided to return. So this is Jason McLeod, and I'm here standing in front of my mentors and friends and teachers' home. This is Ed and Lorraine Warren's residence, and they've lived here for the entire time that I've known them. This is where the classes were held every Monday evening. This is also where the museum was held. And it brings back really great memories about how wonderful and special it was to have been able to work with this astounding couple. And I've called them through the years since I started talking about the cases that I was investigating with them and for them as their student, the pioneers of the modern paranormal investigation craze that thrives to this day. Without the Warrens, there would be no paranormal conventions, I would say, and certainly no television shows. They were the torchbearers, and they're the ones that brought this methodology about exploring the paranormal and ghost hunting. They were called the real Ghostbusters, and for good reason, because they were just incredible people, and I'm honored to have been able to be their student, and I am one of their proteges to this day, and I carry on their work by following in their protocols. But my whole purpose, I'll never be as famous as the Warrens are, and I don't really want to be. But I feel that their message needs to be carried forward for the next generation. And Lorraine was always very, very concerned about the safety of the investigators. That was the first and primary concern, and for, of course, herself and Ed, her beloved. And she was always looking out for everybody's safety, and she would call off investigations whenever that she felt that people were threatened. Granted, she was a psychic and she was able to discern things more easily, but Ed, very serious, very devout Catholic, always cracking jokes though to raise the levity of the situation. Everything is frequency and vibration, and trying to dispel the dark feelings that people were experiencing and so forth. But it was a blessing, and I'm just so proud to have been able to work with them. And my whole purpose is to warn kids against using Ouija boards. And that's why this case took place. Dark Siege, a Connecticut family's nightmare. My name is Jason McLeod, and I began working with the late legendary Ed and Lorraine Warren in November of 1990. I was a sophomore in college at Sacred Heart University. I wrote a newspaper column called Hauntings about the cases that we were investigating. And it is a privilege and an honor to have been able to work with these amazing people, my friends, my mentors. And I'm here to celebrate their lives at their memorial on November 1st, 2023, the day after Thanksgiving, and pay tribute to these amazing people who are the pioneers of the modern paranormal investigation craze.
Said, you have to get me in there. This house is infested with demonic spirits. How strong is your faith, honey? Jason, what did you do? The spirits in the house were doing what they could to prevent us from ever arriving in the first place. The people that worked with the Warrens were very serious. I was hooked. 100%. Always trust your instincts.